Leicester City had an extremely torrid 2007-2008 season, as the club's chairman Milan Mandaric wasn't able to find a stable manager for the club. This had been an issue in the previous years, even before the Mandaric era. In the end, they were relegated to the third tier of English football. This was the first time in history that a club was outside the top two tiers. Mandaric was determined to find a manager that could finally stay the course of his season. And he finally found one in Nigel Pearson. Under Pearson's guidance, Leicester bounced back in the following season, as they became champions of League One, signaling the return to the second division. Pearson's direction, where he implemented a 4-4-2 system that was focused on their academy graduate Andy King, was a key tactic for their success. King is the team's primary playmaker, and together with the wide players Lloyd Dyer and Matt Oakley, they would constantly weave the ball inside the penalty area for Matty Fryatt and Steve Howard to score goals. Back in the championship, the expectations were low on Leicester City to accomplish something. However, things were different now. Since Pearson had the entire season to assess his squad, he knew exactly what he needed. He made some permanent deals on outcasts like Jack Hobbs and made a last-minute loan deal for Sunderland's 19-year-old Martin Waghorn. Instead of the 4-4-2 lineup that he deployed last season, Pearson shifted to a 4-3-3 formation with Waghorn and Paul Gallagher in the wide areas and Fryatt as your main striker. They had the same philosophy as last season, with the three of them combined with Andy King leading the goal-scoring charts. And against all odds, Leicester finished 5th in the league, securing a playoff spot and an opportunity to earn promotion to the Premier League. In the playoffs, they went up against Cardiff City. They lost the first leg, and things were looking disastrous as they were down 2-0 in aggregate in the second leg. However, Leicester made a furious comeback, scoring 3 goals. Their lead, however, was short-lived as Cardiff had a penalty in the 69th minute. The match ended at 3-3 in aggregate, leading to an added extra time, where neither team had the advantage. So it boiled down to a penalty shootout, which Leicester lost. It was a heartbreaking experience for Leicester City to lose the most important game of their season, but there was promise given how Nigel Pearson was able to bring stability back to the club. However, it seemed Leicester weren't keen on keeping him as his replacement. Paulo Sousa was seen watching the playoff games. This forced Pearson to leave the club. Under Sousa's reign, Leicester was disappointing. They ended up at the bottom of the table for 11 consecutive weeks. A poor run-in result led to Sousa's departure, and in comes Sven-Göran Eriksson. But that wasn't the only move that took place in 2010, as club owner Milan Mandaric resigned on November. Thai billionaire Vichai Rakstriaksorn, later named as Vichai Srivadhanaprava, was announced as the new chairman on February 2011. In the end, the club secured a 10th place finish, a far cry from their success last season. Though Eriksson was able to salvage the club, there were still doubts about his capabilities, as Leicester had moments that they were a playoff team since they finished at the 7th position from week 31 until 34. However, the remaining weeks were brutal, as he only garnered 4 wins in 11 matches. And those doubts lingered on as Leicester had a decent start at the 2011-2012 season, garnering wins and draws, only for them to suffer a losing form in October, leading to Eriksson's departure. Replacing him was former Leicester manager Nigel Pearson, who couldn't address the team's struggles, leaving them in the 9th position. That was also the season when Leicester began spending for their championship core. They spent £1 million each on Manchester United product Danny Drinkwater and Nottingham Forest's Wes Morgan. They even acquired Kasper Schmeichel from Leeds United in an undisclosed fee. None of these players had high expectations from pundits, as Drinkwater was basically a United fringe player. Morgan was your typical championship player who spent most of his time with Nottingham Forest, and Schmeichel was living under the shadow of his great father, Peter Schmeichel, and even his former teammate, Joe Hart. And the following season, they kept on with the squad reinforcement by acquiring the skinny and volatile Jamie Vardy from Fleetwood Town. Prior to his arrival, Vardy was a rejected youth player by Sheffield Wednesday. He eventually played for the bottom tiers of English football, starting from Stocksbridge Park Steels. While playing for Stocksbridge, Vardy had to juggle between football and a 12-hour shift in a factory. His goal-scoring exploits in the lower leagues caught the attention of Fleetwood Town and eventually Leicester City. The fee to Leicester City remains undisclosed. In the 2012-2013 season, Leicester City went guns blazing as they sat at the top 5 from week 8 until the 37th. But a familiar drawback suddenly took over their momentum. Some losses and draws in the final weeks of the season placed them at the 6th position, enough to give them a playoff berth. This time, they went up against Watford. In the first leg, they managed to win 1-0. In the second leg, Watford scored an early goal in which Leicester equalized. But Watford responded with a goal to tie the series. Then came the ultimate heartbreaker. On the 90th minute of extra time, Troy Deeney scored a miraculous goal on the counterattack to end Leicester's hopes of returning to the Premier League.
Here's Hogg! Deeney! Do not scratch your eyes. You are really seeing the most extraordinary finish here. It almost mirrors the final day.
Another playoff run, another stinger. In the offseason, Leicester made a gamble by acquiring the heavily doubted slender frame prospect Riyad Mahrez from Le Havre, amounting to £400,000. Mahrez started his career with Quimper, where Matthias Pogba described him as a messy roommate. But he believed in his capabilities given his extraordinary dribbling technique. His skills caught the attention of Paris Saint-Germain and Marseille. However, he opted to go to Le Havre as he was enticed by their youth system. In 2013-14, all of these players acquired by Leicester that never caught the attention of pundits and journalists were crucial for their success. Schmeichel and Morgan were key cogs in their defense. Drinkwater was integral as the key playmaker for the team. And Jamie Vardy silenced his critics as he reigned 16 goals in the 2013-2014 season. Leicester was unstoppable as they only had minor roadblocks in that season, and eventually, they finally won the championship. The long wait is over. After 10 years, Leicester City are now back in the Premier League. But as they reached the Premier League, Leicester was baptized with blood and fire. Throughout the season, Leicester were at the bottom of the league and everyone foresaw their return to the championship after a lackluster performance from September until March. Things were looking bleak and disastrous. However, something miraculous took place. In their last 9 matches, Leicester won 7 games, which pushed them from a last place finish to a 14th position finish. No one could explain how they managed to pull against all odds, and a lot of experts would argue that their run was one of the greatest escapes in football history. Perhaps Pearson should be credited as he finally found a formation that properly suited his team, which he struggled to do so given how he constantly switched between a 4-4-2 to whatever random number he thought of. The last 4 matches saw Leicester use a 3-4-1-2 formation, where defensively they looked solid given Albrighton and Schlupp's defensive effort from the flanks. And offensively, they progressed the ball as Esteban Cambiaso and Riyad Mahrez would link each other up in the midfield areas. Plus, Leicester had 2 scoring threats up front, courtesy of Jamie Vardy's speed and Leonardo Giloa's fox-in-the-box approach. And this worked wonders as Leicester rained down goals against Newcastle, Southampton, and Queen's Park Rangers. They were able to deliver a miraculous run at the tail end of the season. However, not everyone is convinced that they have what it takes to maintain in the Premier League, as their 7-game victory could be viewed as a sudden jolt of desperation. Even their transfers during that offseason weren't able to make any noise, as the players that they acquired like Christian Fuchs, Robert Huth, and N'Golo Kante were viewed as a bunch of mediocre players. And things even grew worse when Pearson was sacked, as his relationship with the board dwindled. This was caused by his son, who was then part of the Leicester City reserve team, got himself involved in a racial sex tape incident in Thailand. He was replaced by Claudio Ranieri. So, by the 2015-2016 season, many pundits would place Leicester City as one of the relegation favorites. Bookmakers would proudly announce that the odds of Leicester winning the Premier League is equal to Star Wars becoming a non-fictional event. Before we look at that season in detail, let's assess the tactical profile of Leicester City going into that miraculous season. Leicester was an extremely defensive-oriented team to the point where they let their opponents dominate possession. Now, some of you might think that this approach is suicidal, given that the opposition is given so many opportunities to move the ball. But Leicester's extremely compact zonal defense tend to frustrate a lot of their opponents. And even teams were deceived to see Mahrez and Albrighton tuck inside, meaning that they have an opportunity to play from the flanks. But Leicester opted to do that as a trapping mechanism. If you try to move the ball to the flanks, both Mahrez and Albrighton together with another nearby forward will instantly close you down, forcing you to go for the unwanted long ball or a back pass. The presence of N'Golo Kante and Danny Drinkwater in the middle is a massive thorn in the opposition's game plan. These 2 players are extremely adept at harassing the opposition. Kante's work rate and energy is extremely mesmerizing as he can cover the entire pitch, and he could also support Leicester's back 4. His numbers would further emphasize his impact as he leads the league in tackles and interceptions. Given that they only accumulated 44.7% possession, Leicester's offense is heavily dependent on the counterattack. Drinkwater is the team's main source of creativity, and he would try his best to unleash a quick pass to the wide players, Mahrez and Albrighton, or the forwards Jamie Vardy and Shinji Okazaki. Vardy's speed is a source of direct play for Leicester City, and in case he is heavily marked, he would try to overload the left side to create space for Riyad Mahrez to conduct his 1v1 dribbles against the opposition. Okazaki would offer his support by either helping Vardy in the overload or providing a passing space for Mahrez. Given the tactics that they've deployed, let's see how they performed during that season. The championship caliber teams during that season were Arsenal, Manchester City, and Chelsea. Some other noteworthy contenders were Tottenham and Manchester United. Yet even with the headline signings or the star-studded nature of these teams, Leicester actually played well against them. They blitzed their way past the defending champions Chelsea in a 2-1 victory in their home stadium, plus they were able to win crucial games against Tottenham and most importantly, a 3-1 victory over Manchester City. That match exposed City's defense as Martin de Michelis struggled against Robert Huth and Riyad Mahrez, which further stamped the idea that Guardiola should now replace Pellegrini. They've even secured 2 draws against Manchester United, which included a Jamie Vardy record-breaking goal-scoring masterpiece and the infamous game where Marwane Fellaini and Robert Huth went all physical with an elbow and a hair treatment. Both of them received a 3-game ban. Only Arsenal was able to dominate Leicester as they stood victorious in both their first and second encounter. Leicester managed to secure 3 losses during that season, 2 coming from Arsenal and 1 from Liverpool. These 2 teams came from the upper half of the table. Having only 3 losses meant that Leicester had the high ground in the entire season, and this was clearly evident from week 22 onwards, where they've maintained the number 1 position in the Premier League. They even delivered inspired performances against the mid-tier and bottom-tier teams. Against Aston Villa, they were down 2-0, yet they bounced back by scoring 3 goals. The same story occurred against Southampton, down 2-0. They tied the game, earning them a point. And a bunch of dominant victories against Liverpool, Everton, Swansea, and the rest. By the end of the season, they've accumulated 23 victories, 12 draws, garnering 10 points above the other title contenders, a feat that extremely impressive for a team that was bound to be relegated from the beginning.
They have blown their rivals away. They have blown us all away in truth. Premier League champions 2016, the amazing Leicester City!
Leicester City's ascent is one of the greatest Cinderella stories in football. But what came after that championship run? The following season was a total disaster. It started when their influential midfielder N'Golo Kante left to join Chelsea Football Club. His departure was a massive blow as Leicester's defense collapsed. Besides Kante's departure, the rest of the Premier League teams grew stronger. Chelsea not only acquired Kante, but also Serie A winning manager Antonio Conte. Manchester City made headlines for the arrival of Pep Guardiola, and Liverpool made key signings by acquiring Sadio Mane from Southampton and Gini Wijnaldum from Newcastle United. Leicester was beaten by almost every team in the Premier League, and at one point they were about to be relegated. Ranieri was sacked and was replaced by Craig Shakespeare. Shakespeare was able to turn the tide and gave Leicester a salvageable 12-seed finish. Though Leicester survived, their 12th place finish was the worst of any defending Premier League champion. Amid the awful domestic campaign, Leicester managed to redeem themselves in Europe, since Leicester were able to win in the group stages against Porto, Copenhagen, and Club Brugge. Plus, they were able to win against Sevilla in the round of 16 and punch their ticket to the quarter-finals, only for them to fall against Atletico de Madrid, a team that shares some resemblances with them in terms of being defensive and in terms of a Cinderella run, as Atleti shook the Spanish football scene when they won it all against FC Barcelona and Real Madrid back in 2013-2014. And after a disastrous English title defense in 2016-2017, Leicester ascended. First, Claude Puel came to replace Shakespeare and Leicester earned a 9th place finish. Then, Brendan Rodgers came and he managed to bring Leicester a 5th place finish in the 2019-2020 season, earning them a ticket to the Europa League. The key players that remained, like Jamie Vardy and Kasper Schmeichel, have been important for the club's resurrection. But management also has to be credited. Leicester City won the Premier League back in 2015-2016 because the team adapted an approach where analytics and statistics would dictate their transfer policy, similar to how the Oakland Athletics did it in Major League Baseball. Players like Mahrez and Vardy were overlooked for their physical deficiencies, but statistics revealed that their qualities could synergize well with each other and form a game plan. This explains why even when Leicester lost key players like Mahrez, Ben Chilwell, and Harry Maguire, they could still recover by replacing them with another set of players who statistically would complement each other. Players like James Justin, James Maddison, Yuri Tielemans, and Chalar Soyuncu come to mind. The efforts of their management was a key factor for the club's successful rebuild. However, it suffered a massive blow in 2018 when Vichai Srivadhanaprabha died on a helicopter crash at the King Power Stadium. His son Ayawat Srivadhanaprabha took over as the club's chairman. But the club's future is looking bright given the current talent pool that they possess, and only time will tell if their efforts will once again pay dividends. And that wraps up our video about the 2015-2016 Leicester City squad. For more information about our content, feel free to visit our social media pages. See you next time!
Spare for Guardiola, joy for Mourinho.